fabrication.
Hello, welcome back to another video. I finally got around to finishing basically the whole upper body for Fulgore. So specifically, I finished the bicep armor, the forearm, and the gloves. Although I might remake the gloves to be a bit slimmer in the future, but for now I want to focus on getting this all finished up. Hopefully I can get the legs and everything from the lower body down done, but that's too much talking. For now, I'm just going to show you how I made everything, so enjoy the video. Just like pretty much everything, I had to create a template. My mannequin's a bit smaller than I am, so I had to use some plastic bags to help get the shape that I'm looking for, as well as kind of bulk it up just a little bit and draw on my template according to the video game character and a toy that I have, and I just pick and choose between the two on which one I would rather go with. This was my original template that I finished. I had to make a version 2 because this one needed a few more alterations, so it was a bit slimmer, as well as kind of fix some of the seams that I originally had. So you'll see the updated version here in the next clip. Here is the cutout version of my template, version 2, traced onto cardstock and then onto some 6mm HD foam. If you happen to be making a similar project that requires a robotic arm, this is very close to a Winter Soldier arm, which will definitely work if you just want something pretty universal. But any shortcut you can take, definitely take it. Just making your own templates, it takes forever. So if there's anyone else that happens to have easily accessible templates, I highly recommend getting them to just give you that extra boost of time that you wouldn't have to waste making everything up. As you can see, most sections have a border over my intended line, so I can glue other sections too. And of course, the sections gluing on top of that lip will be cut at an inward 45-degree angle. Right here, I'm just altering my template so I can glue on the remaining piece. With the main body of the bicep completed, I just need to add on the details. But before going forward with that, I just needed to do a quick fitment test just to make sure I'm on the right track. To help bulk up the arm, I cut out this piece from my original template onto 10mm HD foam and cut each side at an inward 45-degree angle and made a V-groove cut on the back end of the foam and glued it on. I made a template for this piece that goes on each bicep and transferred it over to 6mm HD foam. Once that was done, I made some V-groove cuts and glued it up. With this piece finally completed, I glued it on. This next section is for the back of the arm where the hoses connect. As you can see, these connecting pieces all have angled cuts, so I can keep a nice defined line. Of course, once that piece was completed, I applied my contact cement on both sides, waited until it was nice and tacky, and attached them all together. Next up, I glued on this foam strip for the shoulder area. I glued on a strip of 15mm half round dowel for the upper shoulder area as well. So Fulgore has this weird separation and a hump here, so to recreate that I'm just cutting out a section in the foam, and once that's done I'm going to go back over with a layer of foam that's going to basically skin over this to help everything blend in together. To cover this section with foam, I used the tape method, so I covered the whole area that I tend to cover with tape and go over with a Sharpie to outline those sections, cut it out, transfer it over to cardstock, and then transfer that cardstock over to foam, which I can then cut out and place in that intended area. Next, I whipped up these detail pieces for the back of the arm. This is the only cut that gets a straight cut, everything else is at an angled cut. After all of these components are cut out, I just glued them into place in the back and force them into position to where they look like little pizza rolls. Everything for the bicep is finally completed, so now I just need to add the detail lines on each of these panels except for the little hose section in the back. So I'll just kind of plan out the direction they need to go and then go in with my wood burner to burn in every single line. And here is the finished product. So far I'm loving the way this came out, so I'm just going to set this aside and continue on with the build. Now onto the forearm. I planned out the general shape that I needed and of course made a template. I used trash bags again to bulk up the areas that needed the hump and just transfer that template onto cardstock and then transfer it over to foam. After that, I glued all my pieces together except for the very end section here. You can see kind of marked on the end, but this is where I'm going to place some Velcro so I can get my arm in and out. And of course right here you can see the Velcro in action, so I'm able to split it apart and get my arm in and out. I also placed a bit of foam on the inside seam just so it won't split on me. To make these circle pieces at the elbow joint, I made a C-shaped template which I cut out on 6mm HD foam, and for the outside and inside of the circle I cut it at an inward angle cut, so when I glue it together it kind of bevels inward. I marked the line on the inside of the circle with my Sharpie and went back over it by making a V-groove cut to give it a more defined shape. I filled in the V-groove cut with hot glue, and once that was settled I glued the ends with contact cement. I used my circle cutter to make the elbow joint bases that the pieces I just made glue on top of that. With the elbow pieces finally done, I carefully lined it all up and glued it on. Right here I'm just making some detail pieces for the bottom of the gauntlet, so I glued on a few stacks of foam while the other side just gets angle cuts all the way around. For the stack portion I brought it to my belt sander to sand in a bevel almost all the way around, leaving one side flat and giving it the look you see here. Once I had both of my pieces prepped, I glued them together, and once they were done, I glued that set onto the gauntlet itself. And basically that's just one portion of it, so I just need to repeat it on both sides and then again on the other gauntlet. Next up, I made some cylinders for each side of this detail piece so the hoses have something to connect to. I cut out these detail pieces in 10mm HD foam with a divot at the top that I will have for my foam dowel. With all of my pieces laid out, I finally glued everything together. I used a slightly smaller 10mm dowel cut at an angle on one side and glued the flat end to the larger dowel. I cut out this piece in 10mm HD foam, and this will be the housing for the actual blades. So I'm going to cut out the center material and build around it. I made a couple strips of 6mm foam and just went around the border. Next, I made this template and traced it onto 6mm foam and applied some V-groove cuts all along so I can glue it together and make a little box for the top of my gauntlet. This is where the top will go, and it'll hide the electronics or batteries, whatever I need to use, and to attach it I'll use magnets. I poked some holes and installed my toggle switches for my soundboard, so I'll just slip in the wiring, glue in the other side, and once I have all the wires combined, I just solder them all together into one lead. I installed an elastic strap to hold the soundboard in place, and on the inside I have another set of Velcro supporting the actual battery pack. I included the extra wires for the arm blades for the left hand side as well, so this will be powered by that battery pack too. Moving on, I made a pattern for the arm blade and transferred it over to polycarbonate sheets, which I then cut out on my bandsaw, and using polycarbonate is a bit easier to use rather than acrylic because it doesn't shatter. Since the blades are too skinny to fill up that hole, I did use a few strips of Plastizote, aka LED foam, to glue onto the blades to help fill up that extra void and help disperse the light as well. With my strips glued on and my edges rounded off, I mark where I want to have my magnets on both the blade as well as the actual housing, and use my Dremel to drill out a little divot just big enough to insert my magnets. With everything assembled and ready to go, now the blades can be removed at will. So the last thing I need to do is sand them down so they're nice and cloudy to help spread the light around. Next up, I wired up some LEDs for the blades, so I'm just double checking to make sure everything works before I glue these strips on. And there's a slit that I will feed the wires through so everything is hidden. As you can see here, I'm feeding the wires through that slit just before my glue line so everything can be hidden. And of course, with all of the important stuff out of the way, I can finally glue on the housing, which will complete this section of the build. Circling back to my arm blades, I use my airbrush to coat the edges with my blue paint and kind of feather it out to kind of give it a nice effect. The lights themselves isn't going to radiate throughout the whole blade. It's really going to get around the middle. So I just want to have some contrast around the edges so people know that it's blue when I'm in light. Here is a quick fitment test just to see how it all sits on my arm and just get a good feel for it to make sure everything isn't too tight or too loose. With everything finally done, I applied a few coats of my plastic dip. Once that was dried, I applied a few layers of the glossifier so it has a nice shiny base coat. And then of course, following that, I use my airbrush to paint on the black chrome paint. I have to kind of dust it real lightly so it doesn't crack. Finally, moving on to the gloves, I did the tape method again. So I drew on my pattern onto that tape, transferred it over to cardstock, and again on foam. I glued on the base for the glove as well as the raised detail pieces that attached to that, and just kept building up from there. I taped up my fingers so I can draw on my pattern once again, and rinse and repeat. Transfer that to cardstock and again on foam. With the basic construction all done, all I have left to do is to glue on the hose connectors. So I just glue that on each side and then repeat the same process for the other glove. I've already plastic dipped everything and started gluing on my finger pieces. Definitely should have dyed the glove first, but I didn't and ended up having to paint over it later. But definitely next time, dye the glove. With the gloves finally painted, this is what they look like. And it came out pretty good, not too bad. The last thing I did was install a battery and a switch for the right gauntlet. Since the left already has a battery pack and a whole soundboard system, the right needed something itself so I can have the blade light up. Alright kiddos, that's it. That's finally everything. So this is the finished result. Overall, I really love how it all came out, and hopefully I can get the bottom half done because I really want to bring this to my local con in September. So I'm trying really hard to get everything finished up by then. So I need all the motivation I can get. I want to thank you all for watching. Thank you so much for watching. Y'all be good, stay hydrated, and y'all take care.